Now, I imagine yesterday you had the most amazing afternoon with the keynote speakers. I'll have to admit, I didn't get to make it. Unfortunately, I've had 3 days in bed, not been too well. So forgive me, my body is certainly here and hopefully my mind is not too far behind. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the Mind Lab. And the reason I'm going to be talking to you about the Mind Lab is because we get to teach the next generation of designers, of developers, of information architects, of user experience specialists, of strategists, of business analysts. And at the Mind Lab, we call these our problem solvers, our inventors, our entrepreneurs. I believe these are the people that are going to be changing our future. And I've had the most amazing experience over the last 3 months at the Mind Lab in a new role as General Manager in New Zealand, which we have 4 locations. And at the Mind Lab, we have 2 parts of the business. We essentially have the children and we have the teachers. So on the children's side of the business, we have children that come in and we get to teach them maybe during their school time, after school program, and also during the school holidays. And on the other side of the business, we have our postgraduate program in digital and collaborative learning. Now today I'm here to talk to you about just one side of the business, which is the children's side of the business. And what I'm going to be doing is talking to you through the lens of just one of our pillars. So we have 3 pillars: science, technology, and discovery. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my presentation today, it's at the Mind Lab we teach children to discover. So the way in which I'm going to form up my presentation today is I'm going to take you through some of the challenges that we see in today's society and focusing on the school side of things. And then secondly, I'm going to be talking to you about the Mind Lab solution and how we're combating some of these challenges that we see. And lastly, I'm going to be taking you through some of the benefits that we see firsthand, day to day, across our labs in New Zealand. Okay, so first up, some of the challenges that we see. We're currently living in a cotton wool society. We're still living in a cotton wool society. We have, from very early on, we have a lot of nots in our lives. So we have the do not, the cannot, the will not, the must not. And if you kind of put that into context, it's do not do that, you might fall over. Don't jump over that, don't climb over that. Don't talk like that, you might offend someone. And I think about all these knots and I think, well, all of these knots, how can we let our children discover? Because with all of these knots, discovery is dead. And interestingly enough, I was reading back in April an article on Stuff, and it was written by a woman called Josephine Torvey, and the title was Why Children Are No Longer Free to Roam. And she cited this most amazing statistic. She said that children under the age of 13 who live 1.6 kilometres from their home, the statistics of these children have dramatically decreased from 89% to 35% since 1969. Now I found that incredible. Where's our sense of adventure gone? And if I take my own upbringing and I think about when we used to go on summer holidays, and the first thing we'd do when we got to the lakes, we'd jump on our bikes and we'd go down to the local dairy. And the dairy owner knew us and we'd wave to people along the way, and they knew that we were the McLeod kids that had come up to the lake for the holiday. We'd talk to the dairy owner, he knew our names, and he'd sell us our 50-cent mixtures. Things seem to have changed. So we look at today and we look at the disruption that is out there, and that disruption is starting to change. And interestingly enough, I look at some of the most amazing inventors, innovators, entrepreneurs of our time, and I even look at something like Uber, for example, who's completely disrupting the taxi industry. And I realised that actually for this week we've got a great discount that we can be using in Uber all around town, which is fabulous. And then I saw yesterday on my Facebook feed, there was Russell Brand ranting and saying, you know, this taxi industry is being completely disrupted by Uber. The black cabs in London are being disrupted. Or I take something like Airbnb, totally disrupting the hotel and the motel market. This sharing economy has allowed our entrepreneurs and our innovators to push through. Maybe even something more closer to home. And I look at the Microsoft project, the Collective project, and the bionic arm. And I look at the amazing Albert Monero, who was able to give a child a chance at having a bionic arm and feeling what we might be able to do today. So from a really early young age, we are taught not to disrupt, but yet disruption is so important, and disruption is a part of discovery. The next challenge that we have is our access to knowledge has changed so much over time. And if I think about in the old days, and I think about television and radio and newspapers being the media that people used to go to get their knowledge. And now we have the internet, we have mobile, we have social media. There are so many different channels that we can get our knowledge from. And then I think about knowledge through travel. And I think about the old days, and it was about getting on a boat for 6 weeks and going up to London. Huge planning. It took a long time and probably cost a fortune. Now we can go online, we can book a flight, we can be in London in 24 hours. To be able to expose ourselves to the knowledge of other cultures can happen so easily today. And in fact, we can jump on Skype or a Google Hangout or FaceTime and suddenly be in that other country without even needing to be there. We can experience that culture. And then I think about the time to be able to get that knowledge. In the old days, it took a long time. Maybe you would go into the library and you would sit down and you'd open up the Encyclopedia Britannica. You'd filter through what it was that you needed to get. It took time. Now, everything's in real time. What about the people that we got that knowledge from? In the old days, it was perhaps our family, our friends, our teachers. Today, they're still there. We absolutely still get our knowledge from them. But then think about all those other channels. Think about the mass, the other people, those voices. Most of them might be strangers. And then soon they become confidants, advocates, people who we actually seek knowledge from, but we don't even know them. So we still have this challenge that our access to knowledge is greater than ever before. And if I think about the average teacher in New Zealand today, the profile, age 55 and female, and if I think about that landscape which they grew up in and which they went through teacher training college, these are the children that our teachers were not trained to teach. Completely different. These children are children that have grown up with technology, social media, multiple devices. They're always on. And they are instant messaging the whole time as well. These children, they're hungry for knowledge. They can get answers whenever they want it. They have a point of view. And in fact, they can get their answers so quickly, so quicker than in fact their teachers can probably type http://. And interestingly enough, a couple of examples popped up in the last few weeks. The first one was we were conducting a science experiment with Victoria Ave Primary School, and one of the parents came up with this huge smile on their face, and they were having a bit of a giggle, and I said, what's going on? They said to me, Fee, you're not going to believe what a child has just asked me. They've asked me what a film canister is. And we were in hysterics, as you can imagine. But the reality is that these children have only ever known digital cameras. They don't know analogue. And the other example was an email popped up in my inbox, and it was from one of our centre directors in Christchurch. And it was entitled, I Feel Old. And I opened up the email, and again I had a bit of a giggle to myself. He said, Fee, you're not going to believe what happened to me this morning. I've sat in a classroom and the children asked me what a mouse was. And I was having a good old laugh, because these children have only known touchscreen. And our secondary schools, they still have old assessment. So there's nothing more antiquated than sitting down in an exam for 3 hours in silence, lining up with your pen and pencil, having to sit there. When these children have grown up with a digital environment, with technology at their fingertips, where collaboration is at the heart of everything they do. At the end of their term or the end of the year, they sit down in silence to do this exam. And those that don't follow the norm struggle to engage. So, as I said earlier, we've got children or schools where children have to sit quietly for a long period of time. We might have, for example, a child with high-performing autism, and it's hard for them to sit still. And so these children, they might be in SIFS care, they might have behavioural problems, family problems. The traditional school environment is difficult for them to sit still in. And I wonder about that old chalk and talk model where the teacher stands at the front, one teacher talking to many, when these children have grown up with mass conversations. The world today is really different. Evolution happens before our eyes. Technology, as we know, moves really quickly. And I'm sure many of the people, I'm just looking around this room right now, and I think I'm right in saying many of the people in this room would nod when I say our jobs didn't exist when we went through school or when we went through tertiary. There is no single hardware or software or language or platform or device or social media platform that we all use today, and if there is a little inkling that we might, it changes before our eyes. So the challenges that we have in today's society are things that are very different from the years ago. This is about obesity, it is about global security, it is about health, it might be about big data, it might be even about driverless cars. So we need to actually prepare our future generation, our children, for what these challenges might be, and we need to give them a problem-solving context to work with. We need to give them a chance to problem solve and a chance to discover. Another challenge we have is that girls are missing out because of perception. So we see at the Mind Lab, we see in schools and then we see it in the Mind Lab where children at about the age of 7 to 8, that's when girls realise they become aware of being a female and their role. And I mean, I look around this room now and I can say there's maybe a handful, maybe 10 women in the room. And I also look at my own personal experience, and I've been lucky enough to have had 14 years working in digital and creative agencies around the world, working on big brands and launching creative and digital outcomes for them, Ford and Nokia and Land Rover and back in New Zealand on ASB. And I can count on one hand the amount of females in the technology space that I worked with. And two that I worked really closely with, they were actually developers and they were in their classrooms and they were really lonely because they were amongst all men. And so they left from being developers. One actually went into being a business analyst and one a project manager. And I know for sure that the project manager went into project management simply because there were more females in there. The great thing about those two is they didn't leave technology completely. And I can honestly say they were two of the most amazing women I ever worked with. But I also wonder, and I ponder, what would they have been if they'd stayed being developers and programmers? That would be quite amazing. So we don't want our future generations of women, of girls, to miss out. We want our daughters and our nieces and our granddaughters to be part of this journey because it's really exciting And I'm really lucky that I've been a part of it, and I've been a female in the digital space my whole career, and I adore it. I'm really passionate about it, and I want to take our females on this journey with me. Last up, parents need to get out of the way. So interestingly enough, parents will always default to what they know. So when children are choosing their subjects, parents will default to what they know. So it might be accounting or it might be legal. What they're not thinking about is the careers in 10 years or 20 years' time. We're obviously now living in this technology age, so we need to be thinking in advance of what these careers are going to be. And the world is changing so quickly, as we know. So some of these parents will actually be oblivious to what the subjects are, the jobs are that might be around in the 10 or 20 years' time. And funnily enough, you only need to have a very brief conversation with Frances Valentine, who is our founder and the chair of the Mind Lab by Unitec, and she'll very quickly tell you that in fact it's about 80% of secondary school students' parents who are choosing their subjects for them. So, parents need to get out of the way. They need to let their children take their own journey. They need to let them walk off the jetty. So, just to summarise what I've taken you through with regards to the challenges that we see, we are still living in this cotton wool society, and we need to let our children break away from that. Our access to knowledge is so much greater than it's ever been before. And the world has moved on. Perception of females and the challenges that they have being females are still there. And teachers, the teachers that actually trained to teach different children. And lastly, parents need to get out of the way. So next up, I'm going to take you through how we at the Mind Lab are overcoming these challenges. So we have a problem-solving approach to learning, and I'm going to take you through a bit of an example that we've used at the Mind Lab before, and it's the glue gun example. So what we do is we have two boxes, A and B, and we have children in groups of maybe 2 or 3, and we ask them to get a matchbox on top of box A across to box B, just using a glue gun. And so as you can imagine, the experiment starts off and it's messy and it's sticky and they're all over the show with it. But interestingly enough, really quickly, they realise that the glue goes hard. And after they've taken off all the sticky mess, they realise that they can actually do hard lines with the glue. And then they realise that the glue can be made into a little bridge. And so throughout this process of problem solving, they actually build a bridge from A to B, and they pop the matchbox on top and seamlessly slide it through across. It's a really simple example. So this allows them to actually discover for themselves. We allow them to go through this process because we know that problem solving is really important to everyday life. Second, we allow children to work collaboratively to discover where sharing is at the heart of it. And this is an example that we're showing here of Richmond Road Primary School, and this was just one that was in last week, in fact. And the challenge that they had is they were learning about forensics at school. And so they came to us at the Mind Lab to dovetail into what they were learning in their school environment, to give them an experience about forensics. So first up, what we did is we sat down with them, we brainstormed with them collaboratively. You know, what are you learning in forensics? What do you know about forensics? And so it started with all the different types of forensics, medical forensics and dental forensics and forensic psychology, etc. And then we actually set up a scenario for them, a situation which was like a whodunit situation. It was a crime scene. So we had our team who were a part of this crime scene. So Coco Eros and Damon, who are our tech educators, were very much a part of this crime scene. So what we did, and I'll just play you a little audio piece, we actually had an audio and then we had a crime scene. So the audio they had to listen to, and then they had to go through using problem solving techniques, lots of questions, and their attention to detail to understand what was happening in that audio. And then there was the actual crime scene itself, which was one of our offices at the Mind Lab, and you can imagine there was paper flying everywhere and there was liquid that had been thrown everywhere. So I'll play you two clips. The first one was the clip, which is on purpose is scratchy so that the children couldn't hear the whole thing. And then I'll play you at the end the actual.
Hey guys, it's Coco. I'm running. I need to talk fast. Can you please call me? Following me. Last night I was cramming for my final and turned around and there was a staring at me. I don't know how he got in. I tried to grab, tied him. He had to away and I ran out and followed me home and now it's morning and he's still following me and I'm running. I need someone to call.
Okay, so as you can hear, it's kind of a bit scratchy, right? So the children spent the morning understanding or trying to work out what was going on in that audio. And what they did is that we used Audacity, which is an open source little program to record that and then to put it through the paces. And then there was also photo analysis, so the children came into the actual crime scene and they had their little iPads, or sorry, their little tablets, and they were taking photographs and trying to understand what was going on and zooming in to see what might have been happening in the crime scene. And then they pulled out their magnifying glasses to get in there and see a little bit closer. They then had their little notepads, which they were writing down what they thought might have been. We then had little stamp pads so that they could actually go in and take fingerprints. And they came back into the lab and there were all sorts of things going on with what they thought. They thought that Eros had taken Coco and tied her up. They thought that she'd been tied up in the classroom back at the lab. And then we got them to take a break. We said, come back with fresh eyes. And of course, more things came on, all sorts of different stories. And then we added in another little piece of technology and we got them to have a look under the infrared light, or the UV light, and they saw footprints of a dog, and suddenly another story came up. And so we had about 50 kids in there, and in the end there was probably only about 12 children that got to the actual story. But through this process of observation and problem solving and attention to detail that was required, they had an incredible amount of fun and they worked collaboratively on it. So now I'll play you the final clip of what really happened so you can understand why all the different things were
Hey
coming
guys, it's
up.
Coco. I'm running late for my exam. I need to talk fast. Can you please call the SPCA because I have a dog following me? Last night I was cramming for my final and turned around and there was a dog in the room just staring at me. It freaked me out. I don't know how he got in. I tried to get him out. I grabbed him, tied him up. He had some food, but then he got away and made a huge mess in the office. I ran out and he followed me home and now it's morning and he's still following me and I'm running late for my exam. I need someone to call now.
So you can see the difference between the clips is pretty fast. But of course the children were automatically defaulting to, she rang the cops, she's still been tied up. And so when we asked them questions like, well actually that phone call's been put through to the Mind Lab, why do you think she'd call the Mind Lab? If something was really wrong, who would she call? Oh, she'd call the cops. So there was actually this kind of observation and this attention to detail that the children were working through. So we believe at the Mind Lab it's not about the what, but in fact the how. So we let the children go on this real journey. And we want them to be themselves and we want to find where their creativity lies and how far it can be pushed. And this is a fabulous example in Gisborne, in our Gisborne office, during the school holiday programs. And they had a really simple task. Their simple task was The Voice Gisborne. And so the children were asked to perform a song at the end of the day. And so they had all morning to create their song. And this young chap here got up and performed. And the great thing about what happened is we gave them a pretty open brief. And so when they realised that they could suddenly use anything and dress up and use what we call makey here, which is a little tool to invent things, and Scratch to program up his different sounds, this drum kit came out and he dressed up in his wig and his visor. He was totally lost in his creative genes and he was having so much fun. So what we see is that when we don't put pressure on the children, when we don't put a test or a hard thing that they need to create, the children go on this amazing journey of discovery. At the Mind Lab, we also believe in hands-on learning. So in this example here, you'll see robotics. And first up, we start with asking lots of questions to the children. What do you know about robotics? And, you can imagine, first up, they're like, robotics are so smart. They're like the smartest things ever. And we're like, okay, that's interesting. And we talk about, what about if we had a remote control and we had the remote control 100% of the time over that robot? And what happens when the robot needs to sense something? How might it move? And how might the robot in fact move on its own? How do we do that? So we ask lots of questions because within modern day society we've got maths and science in the school curriculum. So what we want to do is to bring to life science and mathematics in a more hands-on way. And so these children, the task that they've got here in this picture is to program up a robot to take a cup of tea or coffee from A to B, or in fact we get them to take it around a racetrack. So they actually have to use little claws to make it all happen. So we use Huna robotics kits, which we get from Korea, and they come with the software themselves so that the kids can do the basic programming themselves. And I'll just play you a small little video here of the robots in action.
What you're seeing is the roof. What? What you're seeing is the roof.
I'm trying to use.
What's really interesting about doing this is when the children first come to us and we start talking about robotics, as I said earlier, they think they're really, really smart. And then they start doing a little bit of programming themselves. And they're like, oh, actually, I did that. And it's the human behind it that makes this robot do this. So in fact, the technology is the enabler, but it's actually the human that's making it all happen, is the smart one. And the great thing about this is once we actually conduct this little assignment with them, they go away feeling pretty good about programming, that it is actually possible and that they can do it. So this is why we believe in the hands-on learning. Next up, we embrace the changes around us. So as I was saying earlier, in one of those challenges where we've got knowledge that's just so great and it's coming at us from all different angles, we believe that sharing is really important, and that's no matter how old you are. So we're constantly evolving our programs at the Mind Lab. So for example, the forensics example that I gave you earlier, and I'll come on to a catapult example shortly, they're customised programs where schools have come to us and they've said, this is what we're currently learning in school, and we'd really love a hands-on experiment to be able to demonstrate to the children so they retain that knowledge. And so we accept this and we embrace it with open arms. It's fantastic for us, our staff, to learn as well and to embrace change. Now, let me tell you about Eddie. Eddie on the right-hand side there with a little blue star above his head. He's one of our biggest fans. And Eddie is based in Gisborne. And he is bright, he's bubbly, he's creative. But Eddie doesn't necessarily sit into the existing school environment. He finds it's a little bit too rigid and too structured for him. And then he comes to the Mind Lab and he gets lost in a whole day. He gets so creative. He lets his imagination run wild. And the things that Eddie has created on his own have been incredible. He's created this electronic racing game. He's programmed it up himself. He's used Makey Makey for a steering wheel and a foot pedal. He's even created an Indonesian drum set. He's created all sorts of films and animation and all sorts of great things with marbles. So Eddie is one of our rock stars. And so what we did is we decided that why don't we bring Eddie in to talk to our postgrad class? So we have this postgrad certificate in digital and collaborative learning, which is to teach the teachers. And so we have 30 people currently in Gisborne, and they come to us an evening and on a Saturday morning. And here is Eddie teaching these teachers how to learn Scratch programming. It's pretty awesome. So we believe that that knowledge can come from anywhere. At the Mind Lab, we're really adaptable. So I was saying, earlier about bringing in knowledge from anywhere. We're completely comfortable with doing that. We're also aware that technology changes before our eyes. So we're platform agnostic. You would have heard me already mentioning quite a few different types of software which are open source. We believe that the children that are learning something with us, we want them to be able to go home, to log in and to be able to continue to create at home. So we're platform agnostic, we're device agnostic as well. And we also ensure that it's pretty cost effective. So what we see is that the Makey Makey kits, for example, that I've been talking about, they're about $28. We use the open source software free so that people can use it. But one thing I have seen that's come down in price hugely is the 3D printers that we use. So before my time, of course, when the Mind Lab started 2 years ago, they were about $3,000 to $4,000, clearly out of the budget of any school. But now they've come down to about $700 or $800. I'm aware, that's still expensive for schools, their budgets, but they are coming down in price, which is fantastic. So to summarise, at the Mind Lab, we are adaptable. And we keep it really broad to avoid perception. So earlier I was telling you about the challenge that we have around females getting to that, that age 7 to 8 where they kind of realise their role as females. And so we purposely keep it really broad so we don't have subjects or topics that are male or female dominated. And this therefore allows them to go into discovery mode. And the example that I used about the robotics earlier, it's very general, so they can actually learn together and they can get those little wins, and then they can have that moment, that aha moment where they actually realise they can do it, which is fabulous. So avoiding the stereotypes is really important to us. And interestingly enough, throughout all of our labs, the girls are doing incredibly well. Gisborne were just telling me last week that in fact the girls are outperforming the boys. Their confidence is growing. So I'd like to think that eventually we will see the change in females in technology, if we can start them early, feeling confident, get them through that age 7 to 8 hurdle around perceptions, hopefully we can retain more females in technology. Next up, we allow our after-school clubs for all ages. So originally we actually did have guidelines around it, 10 to 15 for example, so it was fairly loose. But we had a couple of children, an example in Gisborne, and they came to our centre director and said, we're not quite 10, they were 8 and 9, but we really want to do the after-school Arduino program. And so the centre director said, hey, absolutely, come and have a go and see how you get on, and we'll just monitor you. And it's amazing because they are even further ahead than some of the 15-year-olds. They've totally grasped it. They know what they're doing. And in fact, they're sharing their knowledge, so they're actually able to sit down with some of the older kids and show them what they're doing, which is amazing. Next up, we encourage them to fail. We want them to fail. It's a really important part of our process. We want them to actually develop as individuals and show their personalities and show their creativity. And we don't want them to be afraid of failure. And in today's society, there is quite a bit of that. Take for the example that I showed you earlier about robotics. We create this safe environment for them so that they can feel like it's okay to fail. This is all about this path to discovery that I talk about. And also at the Mind Lab, we talk a lot about inquiry-based learning and the importance of inquiry-based learning. So this is asking what and why and how and if I did this, to allow them to go on these different paths, and if it doesn't work, come back and try a different direction, and creating a safe environment for them to be able to fail. In fact, I was reading an article quite recently. Well, it wasn't a recent article, I just happened to be reading it recently. It was about 2 years old. And it was basically about a woman called Jane McGonigal. And she was speaking in the States, and she was actually talking about productivity in the workplace. And she cited a few examples from different industries that businesses could look to improve. And she cited this statistic that gamers fail 80% of the time. They pick themselves up and they try again. I love that statistic because it actually allows us to reflect on what we're doing and to say that it's okay to fail, and gamers are doing it all the time. So we create this test and fail and prototype environment, and this is an example of 20 year 3 Queen Margaret's girls from our Wellington lab. And their teacher came to us and said, we're learning about forces. So again, we'd love to take what we're learning in the school environment to the Mind Lab and have an experiential, a hands-on environment for the girls to be able to retain their knowledge. So first up, we brainstormed with them about forces and what they knew about forces and what they'd been learning from school, so it dovetailed well into what we were going to be doing that day at the Mind Lab. And after we discussed that, we got them to actually set up a bit of a test, or a prototype if you like. And this was really simple. It was spoons and it was different types of weights. So we had golf balls and ping pong balls and oranges, as you can see in this picture. And the girls had a little sheet and they had their different hypotheses next to them. And then they went through this process of actually testing if their hypotheses would work or not with regards to their different weights. So they were able to learn hands-on about forces. And we had the most incredible letter that came back from the schoolgirls just thanking us that they'd had the most amazing time, huge smiles in their faces, and they were hugging all our staff at the end of it. So it's really important for us to be able to create this environment where the children feel courageous, they feel that they can fail, they can test and learn. So to summarise some of the solution that we've put in place for the Mind Lab, we implement this problem-solving approach. We embrace change. We're really adaptable. We keep it really broad so that those perceptions of females don't creep on in. We certainly believe in the hands-on learning side of things. We're fine to embrace failure, and we believe it's really important to do so. And we believe in this freedom to create, to let our creative juices run wild. And lastly, I'm going to talk you through the benefits that we see from implementing our solution at the Mind Lab. The children collaborate. This is something that we see every day, and it is amazing to watch. Whether you actually put them into a team-based task or not, they naturally will collaborate and they share their knowledge and what they're learning. And it's phenomenal to actually watch. Confidence is another one that we see all the time. And the cool thing about this is this brings the introverts out. And I even reflect for a moment on my own career, and I absolutely used to adore working with the developers, many of whom were introverts, because as soon as you'd bring them out and make them realise that their solution that they're creating for a particular brand, the front end of it is incredible. And so what we do is we actually use these introverts to be able to teach other students as well. We promote the introverts. You know, many of them will come into us going, oh, I don't know how to do it, and they're quite nervous. And so we give them this comfortable environment where they can come out of themselves, and then suddenly you see these big smiles on their faces. So I want to take you through Jeremiah. So Jeremiah is absolutely gorgeous, and he came to us on the July school holiday program, and his mother drove him down from Whakatane to Gisborne for our school holiday program, and they stayed with their whānau there in Gisborne. And on day one he came in and he was so shy. He didn't talk to any of the other kids. By the end of day one, just being with us for a day in a really safe environment where he could be creative and work at his own speed, he was playing cards with the other kids at the break by the end of the day. He had a big smile on his face. And you can imagine what this does to a parent and a child, from being a complete introvert to suddenly someone who not only is loving what they're doing, but is then interacting with other children as well. So I just want to read out this gorgeous quote that came, letter that came from his mum. So Jeremiah has definitely taken his learnings and has been self-directing his own learning since we have arrived home. I can advise that he has enhanced his website, created another game on Scratch, and also extended his knowledge base through code.org. This is fabulous. This is the kind of thing that we want to see at the Mind Lab. Children share their knowledge with us, and it's really important that they do that and that they feel comfortable doing this. So this is another example of local iwi that came into the Mind Lab in Gisborne for 3 days. And this was all about the children telling their stories from the edge of the world. So Tim, our centre director, really wanted to acknowledge with these kids that physically or geographically, yeah, we are on the centre of the world, but you know what? Technology means that we don't need to be. So these children, they created websites and animations and stories that they could share with the rest of the world to simply show that in Gisborne we don't need to be on the edge of the world. Through technology as an enabler, we can show the rest of the world what we're all about. So again, I just want to take you through this gorgeous letter that we had from one of the people from the iwi. Our theme for the holiday program has been career pathways, and the experience at the Mind Lab directly influenced some of the young people's future aspirations. 3 in particular identified computing, engineering as their passions and wished to further their knowledge and understanding of these subjects. So it's really important, through sharing their knowledge with the rest of the world, with technology as an enabler, we can allow children to discover. So now what we're seeing is children actually talking about careers as inventors and as innovators, which is really exciting. And I want to talk you through a gorgeous story about Te Pare. So Te Pare is also based in Gisborne, and she came to us in the July school holidays as well. And she was another one who was really shy and lacked confidence. And she came to us in the school holidays, and her nan saw the outcome and saw the change in Te Pare from just having a few days with us. And she immediately booked her in to an after-school Arduino program. And so what we're now seeing is Te Pare is telling her whānau that she's going to be an inventor when she's older. How cool is that? So, you know, as I said earlier, the challenge that we've got around children, around females, is that they get to that 7 or 8 and suddenly realise that they're female. So we believe that the gender bias in technology really does need to change, and we believe it can change through things just like this. Next up, one of the benefits that we see is that children with special needs experience success in their own preferred style. So if you think about the challenge that children may have in traditional schools, where they're sitting down on a hard chair with just a desk in front of them and they're told to sit still for a certain amount of time, at the Mind Lab they come into this creative environment. It's different and they like it being different. They can sit anywhere. We have beanbags, we have colourful chairs. Sure, if they want to sit at a desk and be on the computer, absolutely, they can certainly do that. But it allows us to support the differentiated learning paths as well. And the great thing about this is they're creating their own stories. So these guys here, they've got a set there and they're creating stop motion. So they're creating their own stories and they're taking away a piece of content that they've worked on collaboratively that they can take home to their families and friends. This might be something that they wouldn't do as part of their everyday school curriculum. Next up, we see that the children are engaged, genuinely engaged. So, whether they're doing a science experiment or they're creating some makey-makey, if they're doing Arduino, these kids are genuinely engaged in what they're doing. And they get creative and they get innovative. So this is a great example where NZQA approached us for Matariki Week. And they said that they wanted to allow their year 9s and 10s to experience and be more engaged with STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering and mathematics. And so we had about 240 students in both Wellington and Auckland that came to the Mind Lab for a week to learn about those STEM subjects. So they were learning about animation and storytelling, website design, and this basically allowed them to suddenly play around with what career paths may have been an option for them with regards to STEM subjects. So there's a tiny little animation that I've got here of one of the girls, and I'll play it a couple of times because it's super quick. So getting creative and getting innovative is fun. And they express themselves in more ways than one. So this is another example of Matariki Week where we had the Kura schools in. And it was late on actually in the week, and Frances, my boss and the chair and founder of the Mind Lab, she turned to me and she said, "Fee, do you hear that?" And I'm deep in concentration, tapping away. I looked up and I said, "What?" And I looked out and we could see out in the lab in front of us these students who were working on the stop motion and creating these different animations. And then suddenly something amazing happened. I'm going to play you a little clip here at the moment, in a moment, but what happened was Frances and I suddenly had this overwhelming sense of emotion due to this collaboration and this creativity that suddenly came out, this dual creativity. It's about 2 minutes long. imagine Francis and I sitting there, just the most amazing moment when we could see where they were letting this creative journey take them. They were lost in what they were doing with regards to their stop motion and their animation, but then the singing started and they were in a really happy place, which made us pretty happy as well. So to summarise, so the benefits that we see from implementing what we're doing at the Mind Lab, the importance of collaboration, this is certainly coming through, the confidence that we're seeing from some of the children, or a lot of the children in particular, the introverts, the sharing of knowledge, the careers that they're now talking about, being inventors and being innovators. They're allowing themselves to innovate, create and express. And lastly, they're incredibly engaged. So just to summarise what I've taken you through today, so I've taken you through some of the challenges that we see in everyday society, and then secondly through the Mind Lab solution and what we're doing in our 4 locations across New Zealand to help combat these challenges. And lastly, the benefits that we see every day in our 4 different labs. So as I said earlier, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this presentation, these are our animators, these are our entrepreneurs, our inventors, our innovators, our movie makers, our technologists, our tinkerers. These are our problem solvers of the future. And so at the Mind Lab, we're teaching these kids to discover. Thank you.